Hola, minasan! Welcome back for another round of MechWarrior BattleTech research. This is a very special show today because this is a content creator request. Mage Leader is the content creator. He posted up in the comments offering to let me react to one of his videos, which is called The Road to Radstat, the rise and fall of the FRR. I'm really appreciate and thank Mage Leader for offering. However, it's very easy to boast that you got a good video going, but there's an old saying.
Show me what you got.
That's right. Show me what you got. I'm always happy to check out anybody who's got something good going, and he's got a good little thing going here. His video's got well over 2,500 views, 7,600 subscribers, good chunk of likes. So we're gonna see exactly how he delivers and produce very good research material for my little quest. So we are going to find out what Radstat is all about. So be sure to get your notes together as I'll be doing my post research thoughts. This is a call to action. Comment, like, subscribe, follow, hit the notification button, and let us begin the research. Is this an anime or something? Oh. Mage Leader. Okay, that's pretty cool. A nice little opening there.
Hello, fellow mech warriors. Mage Leader here. I gotta say, it's a good time to be a Clan Invasion fan. Between the latest project from the legendary Black Pants Legion and the release of MechWarrior 5 Clans, there's a new focus on this era that's brought it back into the forefront of public consciousness. For many, it serves as the single most dramatic event in the Inner Sphere since the Ameris Civil War. For others, it's the introduction of their favorite players on the galactic stage. As for myself, well, the Clan Invasion holds a particular significance. This was the time when my people lost their homeland, when my grandfather fought for a dying nation and a hopeless cause. This is where the free Rasalhague Republic met its end, the final climax of 5 centuries worth of struggle. It's a tragedy that I can't adequately put into words, but damn it if I'm not about to try anyway. I've often been asked what it is about this particular little throwaway state that I love so much, why I even care for a world I never lived in. Well, the truth is both simple and convoluted, and today I intend to answer that question. The short answer is that their story inspires me. The more complicated answer is that it should inspire you as well. Stick around and I'll explain further. This is the story of the death of a nation, the last gasp of the Inner Sphere's unluckiest people. Today we're talking about the fall of Rasalhague and the journey to Radstat.
Rasalhague. Part 1. Who are these new kids?
The free Rasalhague Republic was one of the shortest-lived states in Inner Sphere history. Many historians write it off as a simple buffer state, an artificial Comstar creation designed to check the power of the new Federated Commonwealth. Indeed, its existence was so brief that many students of history don't believe that it even warrants their attention. I disagree. Rasalhague isn't some new thing that just appeared from the aether. The Republic was the final result of many long, troubled, and blood-soaked years. The Principality of Rasalhague was a small nation consisting of a handful of worlds. It lay on the border of the nascent Lyran Commonwealth and what would eventually become the Draconis Combine. They were largely peaceful, agreeable folk who were more interested in trade and self-sufficiency than in interstellar politics and conquest. They had a military, but it was small, and its purpose was defensive in nature. More than anything else, their desire was simply to be left alone, at peace to determine life for themselves. In a perfect universe, that's how they would have lived. Unfortunately for them, the universe they occupied was far from perfect. Their universe was home to one Shiro Kurita. Shiro Kurita, as I have covered before, was something of a megalomaniac, or what we in the business call a massive fucking asshole. He had one drive and desire, and that was the total control over the entire inner sphere. It was his divine birthright based upon, well, it just was, trust me, bro. At any rate, Shiro would conquer the worlds immediately around his own and amass an army, and once he had a taste for conquest, he was desperate for more.
Of
Shiro
course.
turned his attention to his neighbors, and the little principality of Rasalhague looked like the squishiest target. He launched an invasion in 2330, and initially it went very well. The defenders were caught flat-footed, as Shiro attacked with little in the way of warning. His brother Urizen laid claim to a number of worlds with little resistance. The outnumbered and under-equipped Principality soldiers stood little chance against the might of the DCMS, and so Urizen settled in and prepared for the next stage of his invasion.
Wow.
But there was something he had failed to take into account.
Draconis is such a bully.
Rasalhague was no easy conquest like his previous exploits. Rasalhague had a doctrine, a special piece of culture that they had inherited from their Scandinavian ancestors.
Oh, they're based on
Rasalhague was a
Scandinavian.
master of Fria Kriget. Fria Kriget, or Free War, is a battle doctrine with its origins in ancient Terra's nation of Sweden. Once a dominant military power, it had diminished into a largely unimportant state on the global stage. They had avoided the two world wars and had no real military ambitions, but after the end of the Second World War they faced a change in the status quo.
Right.
An Iron Curtain fell across Europe, and Sweden found itself on one side of a conflict which came to be known as the Cold War. Sweden faced the very real
I'm liking how
possibility of
real history is being
invasion from the
incorporated
Soviet
here.
Union, a much more powerful country than itself. Sweden did not have the funds, resources, or manpower to stand against such a threat, but nevertheless they had to create a plan to protect their home, and so the doctrine of Fria Kriget was developed. Under this system, units of the Swedish military were trained to work both as a cohesive fighting force, but also as singular units, capable of operating without any overarching support. Essentially, they built their military around asymmetrical tactics and self-sufficiency. They built fighters that could take off and be serviced from roads instead of runways. They designed networks of secret underground bases and stockpiles to provide shelter and supply behind enemy lines. Most importantly, they taught their soldiers how to carry on the fight, even in the absence of orders from on high. In the event of an
So
invasion,
basically,
breaking
okay.
their lines would not cause them to falter. They would fade into the forests and mountains of Sweden, along with the help of the civilian population, and carry on the fight, using guerrilla tactics to harass and inconvenience the enemy wherever possible. They couldn't hope to defeat the Soviets alone, but they would ensure that the victory came at the highest price they could give them. Sweden, fortunately, never had to utilize this tactic. The invasion from the Soviet Union never came.
Which is true.
Rasalhague, however, soon demonstrated just how effective the doctrine could be. While Urizen
NATO
Kurita
basically
thought his
happened.
new planets conquered, in reality he had simply put his enemy into a new posture. Urizen had been overconfident, and he made the horrendous blunder of storing the bulk of his war material in one massive stockpile on New Bergen. Rasalhague would punish this mistake with a raid that not only blunted the coming offensive, but came within a hair of ending the Kuritan bloodline entirely.
Oh,
Urizen
they
wrote
were
a letter
that
describing
close.
this event to Shiro, and I will read an excerpt from it to you now. I ask you to pardon my gloating tone while I recite it. Dear Kyodai, with an inflamed heart I write to you. I have suffered heavily from an attack made by the rebellious subversives who reside in the Principality of Rasalhague.
Okay,
and I
comic
seek
book
blood
guy.
vengeance for an eternity. My sons Victor and Isaac are both dead, killed by cowardly villains who would strike blows with stones at children. I will interrupt briefly here to note that Victor and Isaac Kurita were both adults and actively serving in the DCMS at the time of the attack. It's also worth noting that Urizen was directly responsible for the murder of literal millions of families, including children, during the rise of the Draconis Combine, so that line is particularly rich.
What a pisser.
The Principality would put the stolen weapons to good use, and their resistance outlived both Shiro and Urizen. The Draconis Combine never truly succeeded in outright conquering the Principality of Rasalhague,
Wow.
and instead entered into an uneasy alliance with them in response to the growth of the Lyran Commonwealth. Subsumed over the
Oh.
coming decades, but there was always an understanding that
Mortal
Kurita didn't
Kombat!
truly own Rasalhague. They were merely guests until they could be cast off. As many of you are likely aware, the Draconis Combine is a particularly brutal society. Total compliance is required of its citizens at all times. Deviation from the accepted way of life is not permitted. Despite this, Rasalhague was always different. They had their own language and customs, celebrated their own holidays, and observed distinct religious practices. Clashes between citizens and DCMS garrisons were commonplace, as were brutal reprisals. Rasalhague's lack of conformity was an eternal thorn in the side of the Draconis Combine, and the animosity only continued to grow.
They want to assimilate. Yeah, so that's actually pretty that's pretty interesting that the how you say that the real history of Sweden was incorporated as a backstory to Rasalhague's history, since it's Space Sweden, basically. We got Space Sweden. Still waiting on that Space Puerto Rico, everybody. Yeah, and knowing that they were able to hold their own, they were able to, at the very least, broker an alliance with House Kurita because of Lyran, on the rise. It pretty much made sense, but that also meant that assimilation into House Kurita and the Draconis Combine was not going to come about very easily, because it wasn't a total conquest. So it makes perfect sense that that they would have the animosity at the very least. At the very least. It's pretty. That's pretty impressive, especially considering how small they are. And they did lose. Some planets along the way. They lost a couple of worlds to the brothers, but ultimately, in the end, they were able to really fight back really good. And House Kurita is no joke either. They're very, very powerful. So the fact that they were actually able to, push it to the point that they only get an alliance out of it and manage to maintain some level of their freedom and agency, while under the, well, I don't want to say under the thumb of Kurita, but definitely in this very fragile alliance. Part 2, the birth of the Republic, for which it stands.
Rasalhague has always sat in one of the worst geographic locations in the Inner Sphere. It is squashed directly between the Commonwealth and the Draconis Combine, two nations who are constantly fighting some of the most ruthless and bloodthirsty campaigns in the Inner Sphere. And if you know anything about the Succession Wars, then you know that's saying something. When Steiner and Kurita clashed, as they so often did, their battles were fought primarily on Rasalhague's soil. The true nature of war. In any conflict, civilians often find themselves caught in the crossfire, or even worse, as the target of the enemy. The people of Rasalhague often found themselves suffering and dying from the incessant warfare, caught in a struggle between two nations, neither of which they truly belonged to. They grew tired of being pawns in the wars of others, and their frustrations continued to build over the coming centuries. Rebellions and insurgencies grew even more common, and the territory became something of a poisoned chalice for whoever took their worlds. Steiner was confused by this behavior, but Kurita was incensed. The DCMS would not tolerate any less than total compliance, and so they suppressed and brutalized the Rasalhague district even harder than before, but every act of brutality only served to further steel their resolve.
True.
For 500 years, all across Rasalhague, the cry for independence grew ever louder.
Especially when you're getting bombarded from both sides, two different cultures.
To form what would become known as the Federated Commonwealth. Kurita's two biggest enemies had formed a powerful alliance, and the balance of power in the Inner Sphere shifted dramatically. Now surrounded and backed into a corner, the Draconis Combine began to look for ways to strengthen its position for the inevitable war to come. This was when Theodore Kurita was approached by Primus Mindo Waterly of Comstar. The Primus had a radical idea. Comstar, as an organization, is a big fan of the status quo. Massive shakeups in the balance of power tend to make them uneasy. The formation of the Federated Commonwealth had created a potential monster in the Inner Sphere, one that could, in theory, conquer many if not all of the other successor states. Their power needed to be kept in check, lest Comstar lose its position of supremacy. Waterly's plan was simple: to recognize Rasalhague's independence, thereby creating a buffer zone between the Lyran half of the Commonwealth and the Draconis Combine. In previous conflicts,
So
the
Rasalhague
LCAF
is the
had
key.
often enjoyed local support during their incursions, but as a sovereign nation, that support would be replaced with a whole new theater of war, a strong deterrent against Lyran aggression. The Fedcom would have to come for Kurita on a singular front, a far narrower point along the Davian border. Furthermore, with the unruly and troublesome Rasalhague now cut loose, DCMS forces policing those worlds could be easily moved to the front lines, strengthening Kuritan resistance further. It was a sensible proposal. The Draconis Combine would remove a centuries-old thorn from its side, deny their enemy an entire front, and to sweeten the deal, Waterly offered the DCMS a large shipment of high-end Comstar battle mechs. Theodore Kurita agreed to the proposal, and when Rasalhague declared its independence on March 13, 3034, Comstar and the Draconis Combine were quick to recognize their sovereignty. Katrina Steiner, now with the eyes of the entire Inner Sphere upon her, was pressured into surrendering a sizable chunk of their territory to the new Republic's ancestral claims. In a single stroke, Theodore Kurita had not only protected his holdings, but had also deprived the Lyrans of many of their gains from the previous succession war. It was a resounding victory, and not a single shot had been fired. Well, not between the major powers, anyway.
Oh. Oh, wow. Birth in Flame. So basically, Comstar... So basically, the Rasalhague was able to get some support. Man. So basically, they got because they were wedged between the Fedcom and Draconis Combine. They've been basically trampling over the people of Rasalhague without a care in the world. So they're basically fighting for that literal, for that metaphorical. I was about to say literal. That's not how literal works. The metaphorical pie that sits between both of their territories. And it took one marriage in Rasalhague to actually get Comstar to basically. And the declaration, and of course their declaration of independence on March 13th, to really get the ball rolling. Which means that this is going to be a very bloody war. It's going to be a very, very bloody war. Birth in Flame, Part 3.
Conveniently enough, Warlord Ivan Sorensen was dead. He had died in a traffic accident on the same day that Rasalhague declared its independence. His death created an opening, one which Christian Mansdaughter quickly took advantage of. He began the push for independence, but found himself quickly sidelined. Hakon Magnusson would be the one to head the new republic. Magnusson was already an infamous figure. He had been a freedom fighter for most of his life, spending a great deal of time in prison and in the militant organization known as the Tier. He, more than any other man, embodied the spirit of Rasalhague's resistance. He had lived it. His hands bore the blood of both friends and enemies, and he had sacrificed much in the hope for Rasalhague's freedom. He had, at great risk to himself, negotiated a treaty with Primus Waterly and Theodore Kurita. This revelation caught Mansdaughter off guard, and the news troubled him greatly. Magnusson was a hero to the people, an obvious choice for rule, but he was also not a refined man. He was almost like
their Washington.
Cunning and scheming, valuable skills for a resistance leader, certainly, but qualities that threatened to make a national ruler volatile. Mansdaughter had been a Lyran officer, and he knew the value of strong, stable leadership. Magnusson had known a life of hardship, and it had made him hard and bitter. He carried deep resentment, and his policies carried a note of retribution. Mansdaughter was also concerned about the treaty. Like any man with half a brain, he distrusted both Comstar and the Draconis Combine.
Makes sense.
But despite his misgivings, he quietly allowed Magnusson to take his election and contented himself with a generalship and the position of Chief of Staff. Of course, none of this is to say that Magnusson was a poor leader. Though damaged by the years of Kuritan abuse and ferocious violence, he was not a bloodthirsty savage. He was shrewd, cunning, and frighteningly clever. Forming a new nation.
But he
is
was
no
not one
simple
that would
task,
kill
But Magnuson
outright.
managed this with great efficiency.
For joy.
He appealed to Rasalhague's nationalism. They had remained, in spite of repression, the same proud people they had always been, and Magnuson was a symbol of their strength and defiance. Finally, after centuries of waiting, the people of Rasalhague could live freely once again. But not everything went quite so smoothly. Anti-Curitan sentiment had been smoldering under the surface for a very long time, and with the freedom to openly voice their frustrations, many people took things much too far. A wave of anti-Asiatic hatred swept over many planets, with generations worth of bitterness, resentment, and prejudice finally finding a release.
Yeah.
While typically not openly
That would happen
violent,
when you're being
active
oppressed.
mistreatment and discrimination became commonplace. Rasalhague natives who appeared too Curitan, had Japanese family names, or had been known to be friendly toward the Combine found themselves second-class citizens.
Oh,
the hybrid
that's not
language
good.
that had been the common tongue of the district was eschewed in favor of pure Swedish. Japanese was purged from Rasalhague society, and anyone who disagreed quickly lost friends, jobs, and businesses. The DCMS units still within the district watched this movement spread with both concern and distaste, and when their orders came in to withdraw, many of these soldiers were infuriated. Theodore was not the coordinator yet, and while his father had given approval, rumors had spread that he had gone over the dragon's head, rumors which were largely true. Now these soldiers were being commanded by an ambitious upstart to abandon their posts, to leave the remaining Curitans to the mercy of Magnuson's new republic and its discriminations. The outrage went still further. Many of these men and women had fought here during the Fourth Succession War, had bled to defend these same worlds for the Draconis Combine, and now the orders were to turn away and let them go. The disgrace was too much to bear, and a large number of units refused to leave, and they weren't quiet about it either. When the forces of the newly formed and inexperienced Kungsarmé moved to arrest Marcus
What the
Urrea,
heck is
one of
that?
the core ringleaders
My
of the
man.
resistance, they found themselves betrayed.
What a kick.
The 1st Tier Regiment was attacked by the 8th Rasalhague Regulars, and Marcus Curita slipped away to coordinate the rebellious DCMS forces. These units were disowned by the DCMS and became known as the Ronin, and their battles would become a proving ground for the new Republic. If they wanted their freedom, they would indeed be required to fight for it after all. The early stages of the war went poorly for the fledgling nation. They had been promised a peaceful transition of power, and so when many planetary governments found themselves under attack, they were surprised. The Kungsarmé,
about to
the
be a civil
military
war,
of the
huh?
Free Rasalhague Republic, still largely only existed on paper. Individual planets had contracted mercenaries for their defense in the meantime, but this proved to be a fatal mistake. Having never worked with mercenaries before, many naive governors had signed poorly worded contracts which allowed the mercenaries to retain their pay without actually doing any fighting. While the cities burned under the assaults, the
That was
mercenaries
foolish.
sat back and played their fiddles, counting their coins. This betrayal would never be forgotten, and a deep-seated hatred of mercenaries persists in Rasalhague to this day. Hakon Magnusson wasn't about to let his new nation tear itself apart, however. While Christian Mansdottir raced to bring the new Kungsarmé forces into the conflict and stop the bleeding, Magnusson did what he did best. He negotiated. Theodore Curita's honor had been stained by the Ronin uprising, and he was eager to help undo the mess that his forces had made, but those preparations would take time. Meanwhile, there were still battles to be fought. Mansdottir managed to throw together a competent defense, an impressive feat given his extremely limited resources. With half of his promised forces turning on each other, and the other half wet behind the ears and completely out of their depth, he didn't have much to work with. But Mansdottir was no paper general. He was a man of experience and tremendous foresight. He knew of the Curitan obsession with honor and the art of the duel, and so the Ronin were surprised when they met their opponents in battle. The Kungsarmé fought them not with scores of battle mechs, but with infantry and tanks.
Oh.
Mansdottir had ordered a large
Interesting.
shipment of cutting-edge tanks from Aldis Industries, and they had arrived just in time for the conflict to begin. The Kungsarmé may have been lacking in training in battle mechs, but they had some of the best armored vehicles ever built, and crews who were ready and eager to drive the Curitans from their homes.
Tanks
once
versus
and for
mechs,
all.
huh?
The Ronin found themselves unable to make any meaningful gains, and when DCMS forces arrived to bolster the Kungsarmé's ranks, they were already on the back foot. The FRR and the Draconis Combine, working in concert, crushed what remained of the rebellion. At long last, Rasalhague was free.
Wow. Wow, that's wow. So the Theodore Krita really overplayed his hand. It seems like he overplayed his hand there a bit. The hatred really lingered among the Russell the Rasalhagians. I guess that's the way to pronounce it, Rasalhagians. The people basically really hated what Draconis Combine did to them all those years. That's one of the most dangerous things you could ever have, is that kind of sentiment. And it reminds me of like I think it was the Serbs or the Croats, I forgot who it was. World War One, they were so angry with Austria-Hungary that this specific, at least one specific group, and Giuseppe ends up assassinating Ferdinand and led to World War One. Amazingly, that didn't happen here. Oddly enough, that didn't happen in this instance. But I'm talking about in terms of the sentiment and how it just stays with so many people. In fact, we got more closer modern one. That's Poland. Today, Poland and all the experiences of having been taken over left and right. From from Germany to Napoleon. There was Russia. I think I got Napoleon. No, did Napoleon take Poland? I'm not sure Napoleon. But the point is that so many people had gone left and right, hitting Poland and then taking it over and running the government and everything. The Poles today is like never again. They have a never again type policy and have been very resilient to any country that's trying to tell them, oh, do this, do that. At least that's from what I was hearing in the news and such. And yeah, Rasalhague had the same sentiments. It's like they weren't going to let Draconis Combine try again through through this small little faction rebellion that was building up and everything. Man's daughter and teamed up with Magnuson, if I understood that correctly, and was able to push back on Theodore Kurita's Ronin. Meanwhile, the people who see any citizen that was half Japanese or spoke Japanese or was an expat from the Draconis Combine was all just mistreated and everything. You see, this is what happens when you act in cruelty. Never act in cruelty, For cruelty will surely find you in return. Chapter 4: The Candle That Burns Twice as Bright.
The Free Rasalhague Republic was in a precarious position. With more powerful neighbors on either side, it was expected to maintain neutrality at any cost. Despite Christian Mansdaughter's misgivings, Hakon Magnusson was actually the perfect choice to maintain this delicate balancing act. He knew how each of his neighbors thought, their desires, and their fears. He also knew what his people were capable of, and how to use that to his advantage. To the great houses, the Rasalhague district was a morass, a hole in space to throw troops into. What they would gain by taking it would always be less than what they would lose, and so they chose to cooperate. Additionally, both Steiner and Kurita had a vested interest in maintaining Rasalhague as a neutral state, as its existence denied both parties a staging ground for attacks against the other.
True.
An incursion into the FRR was guaranteed to start a much larger war, and so the Republic appeared set to become another long-standing nation in the Inner Sphere.
Good.
They would make it less than 2 decades.
Oh.
Throughout early 3050, scattered rumors began to trickle in from the periphery. Stories of mysterious invaders with strange alien technology who descended upon unsuspecting planets and swiftly crushed anyone who stood in their way. While most dismissed
Was that
these
the
stories
clans?
as tall tales and exaggeration, on March 7, 3050,
I see
the
Omnimax.
truth became blindingly clear. The clan invasion needs little introduction. It was a bulldozer of offensive that would forever reshape the Inner Sphere, an invasion so destructive that its effects would be felt for centuries afterward, and the tiny nation of Rasalhague was directly in its path. What followed was something akin to watching a small child standing in the path of an oncoming freight train. The Kungsarmé had learned a great deal during the Ronin War, but they were hopelessly outgunned and outnumbered, and nobody had ever faced an enemy quite like the clans. On the open battlefield, there was no force capable of standing against the onslaught, at least not in 3050, and the Kung's army stood no chance. However, to say that they were unprepared would be a false assumption. The source of the invasion had been a surprise, but the nature of the fighting was not. Christian Mansdaughter had not been idle during the 16 years of peace.
Mansdaughter.
He had been analyzing the Republic's position and preparing for its national defense. And like most great military commanders, he was a student of history. First Prince Magnusson had not invested heavily in the Kung's army, believing that diplomacy was the best way to maintain peace with his neighbors, and he had delegated the military affairs to Mansdaughter. The general's requests for better equipment fell on deaf ears, and so he had prepared to make use of what he had. In any potential war, Rasalhague would be at a great disadvantage, but this was nothing new for them. They had never once fought a war on equal footing, and the past offered valuable lessons on how to handle a superior foe.
And that's scary.
Mansdaughter prepared his forces to reinstate
That's scary when you have a force that remembers its past.
The art of Fria Kriget. When clan forces
it's all come together now for
they
your
found
Kriget.
deceptively weak resistance. Units fled from battle, withdrawing deeper and deeper into the Republic. World after world fell to clans Wolf and Ghost Bear as they gobbled them up like ravenous beasts. Only
Jamie
after
Wolf.
some time had passed did they begin to realize why. Rasalhague had been a feast, but it rapidly began to give them indigestion. The troubles would begin, fittingly enough, on the world of Rasalhague itself. The Kung's army had been falling back to Rasalhague from across the FRR. Units that had been a marginal threat on their own now congealed into a more formidable foe. Magnusson was determined to make a stand, and Mansdaughter promised to ensure that Clan Wolf, when they finally took the planet, paid dearly for every inch of ground they claimed. He deployed his forces well, taking clan tactics into account as he did so, but there was one thing that not even his tactical abilities could prevent: the treachery of a mercenary. Clan Wolf had recently captured Phelan Kell, son of the legendary mercenary Morgan Kell, and Phelan had something of a god complex. He fancied himself a grand chess master, a master manipulator, and the pawns on his board were the lives of Kung's army soldiers. Thinking that a prolonged battle on the world would be too destructive, he chose to betray the Kung's army by leaking a vital piece of intelligence to the clan. Phelan had been to Rasalhague before, and he knew all too well of the annual sickness that regularly struck the planet.
Really?
A nasty condition known as the Fenris Plague.
Fenris
When Clan Wolf finally made their
Plague.
move, over half of the Kung's army was bedridden with high fevers and uncontrolled vomiting. As a result, the battle
take
went more
that to
quickly than
consideration
Mansdaughter
for
had
research.
hoped, but not as quickly as Kell had anticipated. The clans faced little resistance at first, easily sweeping aside the weakened regiments that faced them. But when they reached the outskirts of Reykjavik, the capital city, everything changed. The fighting within the city was ferocious. Racked with fever and barely able to even stand upright, the soldiers of the Kung's army continued the fight.
Damn.
Never before had the wolves seen such determination, but the reason was obvious in hindsight. Reykjavik was a place of symbolic significance.
Well, they weren't going to be
the
conquered
birthplace
again.
of Rasalhague's freedom and the home of the first prince. The men and women
Home
of
of the first
Rasalhague
prince.
would have laid down their lives anywhere
It's too
had
historical.
Magnusson given the word, but this city was one where they would be honored to sacrifice themselves.
Wow.
Clan Wolf wanted the city. The Kung's army would grant them a ruin. The clan's analysts had looked over the tiny resistance that remained on the planet and calculated that the assault on Reykjavik would be over in 2 hours. It dragged on for 2 days. Every street was barricaded, every alleyway was a minefield, every window a sniper's nest. The clan was forced to bulldoze their way through, one building at a time. By the time the shooting finally stopped, Reykjavik, in practical terms, no longer existed.
Wow.
Khan was equal parts horrified and impressed. The waste of life and material was enough to make any clanner squirm, and yet they had been given their greatest fight on the campaign so far. For the first time, they had found what they considered to be a worthy opponent.
Huh.
At the very least, they could rest easy knowing that the fight for Rasalhague was over. But it wasn't over. The first prince had escaped off-world. Christian Mansdaughter had taken what remained of his forces into hiding, and he would soon demonstrate the true nature of Rasalhagian warfare. The clans were once again caught by surprise. Despite their overwhelming victory, the fighting did not stop. Raids struck their supply convoys, their equipment was regularly destroyed or sabotaged in clandestine strikes, and top-ranking officers were regularly found with their throats slit, having been murdered in the night.
Dang!
All across the planet, Clan Wolf was experiencing the hell that had dogged the DCMS for over 300 years.
Clan Wolf.
The natives were not rolling over and accepting their new rulers. They stood in defiance and continued their war, setting their own new rules of engagement. This phenomenon wasn't limited to Rasalhague itself. All across the FRR, pockets of resistance harried the clans. Insurgents became a nightmare for their forces, and the invaders suddenly found their pace dwindling as their logistics suffered.
Yeah, the supply lines are
used to
short.
honor
They're always
duels
short
in
for the
Code of
clans.
Zelbrigand were at a total loss. This kind of warfare was as alien to them as good fashion sense, and their doctrine was completely incapable of handling the resistance. Fria Kriget was serving its intended purpose, and the clans soon realized that while they had conquered these planets, they did not truly own them. Maintaining their offensive became more and more difficult as their backlines continued to draw resources away from the front. They had come to the inner sphere like a charging lion on the open savanna, but now they were getting bogged down in a swamp of their own making. All of this was troubling, but the worst of it was yet to come. Above a small, seemingly insignificant planet, the men and women of Rasalhague would demonstrate precisely the kind of whirlwind the clans had sown.
It looks like the clans just went in over their head again. It sounds like they had thin supply lines and everything. They underestimated Rasalhague. They clearly didn't do their research into what went down with Rasalhague. You know, their experiences with House Kurita and the Draconis Combine and Steiner and the Lyrian and Lyrian. Then of course and the Federated and of course Comstar. Yeah, they learned from all of that, and I like that. I really like that. It all came back. The historical, real world, came all the way back. Fria Krieg. I can't pronounce that very easily. Fria Krieg, came back into play. It's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And so, once again, Jamie Wolf, the Clan Wolf, Clan Bear, just. They overplayed their hand. They clearly overplayed their hand because they were doing a good job, but they underestimated. They truly underestimated the how you say. Truly underestimated Space Sweden. They're like, yeah, you're not taking this capital. It's historic. If we're going to lose it, we're gonna make sure you never own what we own our culture. That's pretty damning when you think about it. They were willing to sacrifice all of it, and of course the prince makes it out. But yeah, the story is really solid so far. I'm very invested. I know I'm talking over some of the stuff that I'm hearing. Part 5, Radstad. Here we go.
Radstad was to be Håkon Magnusson's next refuge after fleeing Rasalhague, but the road there wasn't a straightforward one. The fleet was forced to make several jumps, dodging the clan's fleet maneuvers and remaining undetected.
That must have been tough doing those jumps.
When they finally reached Radstad, they were horrified to discover that it had already fallen, and that the Direwolf, flagship of Ilkhan Leo Showers, was in orbit along with the bulk of the invading warships. The first prince had jumped directly into the wolf's jaws, and the entire war was suddenly put in serious jeopardy. Fortunately for Magnusson, however, he was not facing the clans alone. Part of his security detail was the first Rasalhague Drakons, the absolute best of the Kungsarmé's aerospace pilots. Among them was a particularly ferocious woman, a brilliant fly girl by the name of Tira Miraborg. Tira was no stranger to conflict. She had grown up on Gunsberg, and her father had been Tor Miraborg, the planet's governor. Tor had been a firm father, a man of strong will and a stronger heart. When the Ronin War threw Gunsberg into chaos, it was he who had united the world and its people, but the affair had taken its toll. Tor had, like so many others, been betrayed by his hired mercenaries, and the fighting had come within literal inches of claiming his life, but he had prevailed. The betrayal would stay with him for the rest of his life, driving him to bitterness, resentment, and paranoia.
They're all
it
so
would
bitter.
ultimately destroy the man he used to be, and as he aged, he dwindled into a shell of his former self.
Damn.
Tor sacrificed more than his youth to building the new republic. He had given it his very soul as well. Tira had watched her father's decline. She knew all too well the price that had already been paid for her freedom. In her mind, there was no sacrifice too great, and she wasn't about to let her father's work come to nothing, not after everything he had given up, both for her and for his people. The clans had been caught flat-footed by the sudden appearance of an enemy
Oh, this
ship
is so
in the middle
cool.
of their
What
fleet,
show is this?
and they were slow to respond. Tira wasted no time. Before the clans even knew what had happened, the Drakons were already making strafing runs on the Direwolf, desperately trying to buy time for the first prince to escape. The clans were slow to launch their own fighters, but deployed mag-locked battle mechs onto the hull to join in the fighting. Tira led her squadron through multiple attack runs, each one chipping away at her numbers until only a handful remained, but she did not relent. She was on a one-way trip, and she was determined to make it count. Even when the ships finally jumped away and left her stranded, she didn't stop her attacks. Finally, her Shalone took a hit, nearly crippling her fighter and badly injuring her. The extent of the damage isn't precisely known, but it was likely fatal. Faced with the inevitability of her own death, Tira showed no signs of fear. The only thing she felt was righteous fury. She thought of her father, of everything her family had lost while founding the FRR. She thought of all the friends she had made, and those who had died to protect what her father had helped to build. She thought of the clans and the uncaring arrogance with which they sought to invalidate it all, and in that moment she made a decision that would change history. Perhaps her life wouldn't mean much in the grand scheme of things. Perhaps the Republic was doomed to fall and to disappear. There was nothing Tira Miraborg could do to stop that, but there was something she could do. With one final act of defiance, she could ensure that no matter the outcome of the war, Rasalhague and its people would be remembered. Tira turned her stricken fighter toward the Direwolf one more time and pushed her throttle all the way forward. She said a brief goodbye to her wingman and sent a distant one to her father, then lined herself up with the warship's bridge.
If you see my father, tell him I made him proud.
Wow.
Her fighter slammed into the ship, turning the bridge into a depressurized death trap of fire, vacuum, and shrapnel. The clans watched in stunned silence. Ilkhan Leo Showers was dead, killed by the selfless sacrifice of one insanely dedicated pilot. The reaction to this attack was strong and chaotic. Many of the high-ranking warrior caste were outraged and proposed taking out their hurt feelings on the people of Rajdot. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed, and the planet was spared from a reprisal.
Wow.
In the end, it was decided that the invasion would be put on hold.
Really?
Following their customs, the bulk of the warriors would return to the homeworlds in order to elect their new Ilkhan. And just like that, a single young woman from the little FRR had single-handedly halted the entire clan offensive in its tracks, accomplishing in one brief engagement what multiple great houses had failed to do for months. Tira's attack was so bold and so impressive to the clanners that she would eventually be canonized in the Remembrance, a collection of poetry that forms the clan's oral history.
Wow.
Rajdot was, in many ways, Rasalhague's finest hour, the moment where they demonstrated just how dangerous it can be to underestimate your opponent.
Yep.
While the attack itself had largely been a fluke, wars are often decided by who can best exploit the whims of fate, and in the free Rasalhague Republic, courage and selflessness like Tira's was commonplace. These people had seen their nation rise out of oppression, forge its own existence through sheer grit and force of will, and they loved their homeland with their every waking breath. The clans had demanded, and indeed expected, their surrender and compliance, but centuries of resistance had created a breed of human that no clan could ever understand. Their desire for self-determination made them immune to fear and repression, and when the invasion finally resumed, they found Rasalhague even more of a handful than before. The strain on clan logistics was beginning to wear on them. Warriors were dying in alarming numbers.
Of course,
without
the
a
logistics
viable
would be
foe to fight back against. The insurgencies had local civilian support, and every policing action only strengthened their resolve. Clan Wolf began to get desperate. The fighting had to stop, or else they risked the viability of future operations. Fortunately, they had an ace up their sleeve. They had captured Christian Mansdaughter, and they believed him to be just the solution they needed. Though he was in custody, his soldiers continued to fight on without him, as did the rest of the Kung's army. They offered him a deal. They would give him immense power, rule over the entirety of the clan's holdings in the former Free Rasalhague Republic. He would be free to run it as he saw fit, within reason of course, and secure whatever kind of future for his people that he desired under clan protection. All he had to do in return was order his forces across the nation to stand down and to help subjugate those who refused. It was a tempting offer.
But
Despite the resistance, the outcome of the war was a foregone conclusion. Rasalhague was dying, and one way or another the clans would eventually control it all. Here was an opportunity to at least have a man of the people in charge, a chance to secure a piece of their identity before the invaders
damn, that's a
took it
tough
all away
choice.
by force. Mansdaughter, however, didn't take long to give his answer. He was outraged by the offer. Sell out his own brothers and sisters for his own gain?
there you go.
Erase everything they had sacrificed with a simple pen stroke? The very idea that the clans would even consider the offer was insulting, and showed just how little they thought of his, and by extension Rasalhague's, character.
Good for them.
I believe that it is crucial to understand this point, as it will be relevant later. When offered an easy way out, a compromise that would secure some semblance of Rasalhague's independence while still under clan rule, Mansdaughter said no.
Because it'll just be like
Nothing
House
less than
Kurita.
full freedom was acceptable, and there would be no negotiating. The clan imprisoned Mansdaughter for his trouble, and the fighting continued. The war would ultimately culminate with the Battle of Tues in 3052, which finally put an end to the invasion. The clans had been stopped short of their ultimate goal, and the delay caused by Rasalhague's resistance and Tira Miraborg's sacrifice had given Comstar just enough time to prepare their defenses.
Everything goes back to
The
Tukai.
inner sphere was saved, but what remained of Rasalhague? A small handful of worlds was all that remained of the nation, and the Kung's army had given every ounce of their strength in its defense. Virtually nothing was left. Hakon Magnusson had escaped, and Christian Mansdaughter would join him after the Wolf's Dragoons performed a daring rescue operation, but the Republic existed as little more than a scrap of paper. Its
Damn.
worlds had been captured, its armies decimated, and its people placed under new rulers yet again. Even so, their spirit lived on. Throughout the worlds of the former Republic, hope burned strong that perhaps one day the first prince would return, and Rasalhague would once again be free. In the meantime, they would continue to do what they had been doing for centuries.
Survive.
Resist. And wait.
Oh. Man, that is such a sad conclusion. Man. And yeah, you know, given the experience that Mansdaughter had with the Draconis Combine, yeah, he's rightfully insulted that the clan, you know, chose to offer such make such an insulting offer. Not like the clans really had no idea what Rasalhague went through. Because if they did, they probably wouldn't even have messed with them. Maybe they would have done a little bit better. But no, they decided to go and attack and then want to be conquerors. You know, even a kitten can bear its fangs. You know, that's something that the clans just didn't understand. You know, and of course, all roads go back to Tukai. So, oh, that's hilarious. All roads go back to Tukai. But man, Tira was awesome. Honestly, just went full kamikaze on Direwolf and took out Leo Shower and became canonized by the clans for all eternity. But yeah, because of that, they had a chance to try and preserve whatever they could. Rasalhague was able to preserve whatever they could of culture and history because of her. Even though the inevitable was going to happen, and it did. I'm wondering if well, he didn't explain it, but did Lyran and Draconis successfully, you know, split the whole region, the whole entire country, in half, and the clans kept what gains they had. Because as he said, they were all reduced to paper. I'm wondering who took the worlds. How it was distributed in the end. or it's all just part of the clan space. Part 6, and now back to our program.
It's been many years since the end of the clan invasion. You may be wondering where Rasalhague is now. Well, it's complicated. This is where I fear I need to depart from historic analysis and venture into the realm of nonsense, because what happens next, well, it kind of boggles the mind. Rasalhague would fall largely under the dominion of Clan Ghostbear, the most lenient and even-handed clan. Historians from this time period assure us that the clan and Rasalhague actually got along really well, and... Wait, hold on, what? Yeah, so despite the clan snatching away their hard-fought freedoms, butchering their family members by the tens of thousands, and organizing them into a culturally incompatible caste system, apparently the people of Rasalhague actually really enjoyed their claner overlords.
What?
Why? Well, because ghost bears have families.
Really?
Yeah, I don't get it either. Hey, you know what other major power ruled over Rasalhague with a strong emphasis on family ties? The Draconis Combine. But anyway, according to the texts, Rasalhague would fully integrate into clan society, and the two would become indistinguishable.
What?
Wait, what? Aren't these the same people who deleted the Japanese half of their culture and language the moment they had the chance? These people don't assimilate. How in the fuck? They were even given the chance to provide themselves with a decent amount of self-rule under the clans.
Yeah.
And they declined and chosen to keep fighting. Oh, but it gets worse. Not only did they fully integrate with Ghost Bear, they even fought a civil war on their behalf. Not over their own independence, oh no. No, Rasalhague fought a war with itself over whether they wanted to be subjugated by Clan Wolf or stay under Clan Ghost Bear.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me. It bothers me.
Who
It bothers me a
wrote
lot.
this
The
part?
history of the Inner Sphere beyond 3067 makes little sense for anyone.
Wait,
but
let me see the
the
author's
history
name.
of the Inner Sphere beyond 3067 makes little sense.
Hold on. There's a book
The
here.
history of the Inner
Hold on.
Sphere.
Let me see this book. Let's see. Catalyst. An Ill Clan source book. Who wrote that? Who wrote this plot? Is this canon? No, this cannot be canon. After all that, you derailed the whole entire Rasalhague?
Bother me. It bothers me. It bothers me a lot.
The history of the Inner Sphere beyond 3067 makes little sense for anyone, but Rasalhague essentially converted itself into an entirely new group of people overnight. No one seems to know precisely why. Maybe it was something in the water. Regardless, Rasalhague is a thing of the past. Even the worlds that had managed to escape the invasion eventually joined Ghost Bear, of their own accord. It's an unfortunate ending to one of the Inner Sphere's greatest stories, almost as if the history was written by a team of hack writers who had no idea what they were doing. Nah, couldn't be.
Nah.
Rasalhague is but it's also something more. It's a reminder of a better time, not just in that little corner of space, but in the Inner Sphere as a whole. It was the last explosive send-off of the era, the one which many consider to be one of our universe's greatest moments. There's a reason that so many of us cling to the past. It was a time of great heroes, daring adventures, epic battles, and courageous final stands, of men and women who defied the odds and fought for a better world. It's just a shame that they never got one. Amidst the chaos of modernity, these old tales inspire us. And for this old grognard, no story is more inspiring than that of a little nation who refused to go quietly. Right up until it did.
Yeah.
Call me old-fashioned, out of touch, or any other thing you want, but I miss those little space Swedes. And I hope that now, at the end of all my ramblings, maybe you do too. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, this is Mage Leader, signing off.
You see, there's a reason why manga and novels, for the most part, are always written by just one person and one person alone. Always written by one person alone. Okay? See, because when you put it in the hands of other people to continue the story, they don't read the source materials. They don't read what came before it. And if they do, they may have had the critique of not liking what they read and wanted to take it in their own direction and make it their own. Now, there's nothing wrong with trying to make a story your own that you're continuing. You know, we've seen, there's been a lot of it. Star Wars, Star Trek, Aliens, Predator. There's a lot of comic books, novels where people, wrote, make it their own, and stay to the source material. They'll take it into another direction, but still retain the qualities of the characters that made the characters. Spider-Man, I'll give you one good example. Okay, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby stopped writing. Once they stopped writing, they passed it to the next person. Next person, kept Spider-Man in his classic suit. Little modifications, adding a little webbing underneath the whole thing. Did not sacrifice everything that was taught to him. Great power comes great responsibility. The human element, him getting sick or missing appointments and such. None of that was lost on Spider-Man. You know what I'm saying? After Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's run. Then came One More Day in the end, but there was a lot of worse things before that. Like what was that? The Clone Saga. You know what I'm saying? But the thing is that Spider-Man. But the thing is that even with the Clone Saga, it's always writer to writer. You know what I mean? It's always writer to writer that will either mess it up and then the next writer fixes it all up and everything goes back to being the way Peter Parker is. I'm just using Spider-Man as an example because he's a perfect example of derailment. No greater derailment than Civil War, but people say One More Day. To me, Civil War was the big derailment on Spider-Man. But that's my opinion. The point I'm trying to make is that this was an amazing story that Mage Leader said. Okay, this was an amazing story, and the fact that it got derailed the way it did. And the thing is that I believe that that whole thing with Ghost Bear could have worked. Should have worked if they had remembered the history of the of Rasalhague and put that into application. Because when you put it, because to put this in perspective, Ghost Bear, was allowing them to allow Rasalhague. Okay, say they're allowing. Ghost Bear should have been the ones assimilating into Rasalhague. Saying into Rasalhagian culture. Not the other way around. Rasalhague should not have adopted Ghost Bear's culture because history has shown and written that they refused to assimilate into House Kurita and the Draconis Combine, and that the abuses of Draconis Combine was the motivating factor of them rising up and becoming a republic, albeit a short-lived republic because of the clans. But because of this derailment, it'll be like, okay, so then why didn't Man's Daughter just accept the whole thing if that was going to be the case? And they would have still retained everything, because that's why the derailment is bad. It makes Man's Daughter's decision look horrible. It makes Man's Daughter look like an idiot for not taking the deal, because the clan was giving them everything. You know what I'm saying? But it was totally understandable why Man's Daughter didn't want to do it, because the last time Rasalhague did an alliance like that, House Kurita abused them. Draconis Combine abused them. That was very consistent. Most definitely and absolutely consistent for Man's Daughter to say no, because they always pay attention to their history, and the history said House Kurita under an alliance was a disaster. Doing another alliance with the clans this time will be another disaster. And they chose to fight to the end. Okay. And what few worlds were left remaining, that left them to just being a paper. Okay. They were put under the care of Ghost Bear. Now, if Ghost Bear proved to be the more reasonable clans of the clans, you know, and we're willing to let Rasalhague, you know, to live on their own, then Rasalhague should have under the guise of Ghost Bear restored you know, its sense of territory, but it would have been under Ghost Bear's rule. Yes, it'll be just like House Credita, but it'll still be Rasalhague, you know, culture wise, beach wise, everything. You know what I'm saying? Without the assimilation, Ghost Bear could have showed that, yeah, there won't be any assimilation, you have autonomy, but they would just be under the sphere of influence of the clans, specifically with the Ghost Bear. That would have been good writing. You know, the culture would have been preserved and everything, and could have planted the seed for future storytelling that Rasalhague may one day rise again and fight for freedom. This whole derailment was just terrible. This is terrible writing. You cannot, for all writers out there, you have to pay attention. If you're being assigned someone else's work to continue, read. Don't get arrogant and think that you could write better than your predecessor. You know, don't do that. Okay, don't do that. First and foremost. Second, read everything. Read all the source material that is relevant to what you are tasked to write. Okay? And make sure that it is in full application to what you are going to expand upon. Because you're being given a chance to expand upon and come up with something probably new, maybe something original for what you're writing about. But that doesn't automatically mean you invalidate everything that came before it. Because let me tell you something, fans are attentive, and the internet. Let me put it like this: before the internet, yeah, fans were very, very, very crazy over. Let me give another good example. Okay, Batman replacing when the Robin, Dick Grayson Robin had to grew up, got replaced. He went on to be Nightwing, so they got a replacement, Jason Todd. Fans didn't like Jason Todd. And then they ended up killing him off. You know, the fans didn't like the change, and the fans voted to kill him off. Okay, so really keep that in perspective. That's how volatile fans can be when you change something up like that. You know, when you change something up and they don't like the changes. You know, I'm not saying that you can't, you know, put a spin or add something new, you know what I'm saying, and so on. I mean, look at Superman. Superman didn't fly in his early writings under Schuster and Siegel. It was over time that his single, you know, one giant leap in a single bound became a whole flight. You know what I'm saying? But it didn't take anything away from Superman, and that's what I'm saying. When you are tasked to continue on someone else's story, you know, you cannot invalidate and wipe out what came before it just so you can come up with something that you believe is better, or something that could that you think will make the fans happy. You know, that you think you know what I'm saying, don't get too full of yourself is what I'm saying. Don't get too full of yourself. Respect the source material. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to incorporate every facet of what came before, but be attentive of the baseline. As long as you have the baseline, fans are fine. As long as you have the baseline of the predecessor's story, fans will be fine. Fans will enjoy the new stuff you incorporate into the baseline. Spider-Man has a baseline. With great power comes great responsibility. He gets sick. He gets injured. He misses appointments. He upsets his friends when he doesn't follow through on them. His webbing is always going to be a device. His suit is always going to be red and blue. You know, there's nothing wrong with a little shakeup, like when he got the alien costume, because it led to something even bigger in the end with Venom and the symbiotes. You know what I'm saying? But it didn't invalidate. But the suit, the black suit, did not invalidate everything that was Spider-Man. You know, it didn't invalidate everything that came before. He still had his sense of responsibility. He was still making mistakes. He was still getting sick with that, with the alien suit, the symbiote, and ultimately the symbiote added to his mythos, in which it broke free, became Venom with Eddie Brock, and all the memories that and feelings and sensations of Spider-Man was then incorporated into Eddie Brock, and Eddie Brock knew who Spider-Man is, and started tormenting him. And Spider-Man was still Spider-Man. His baseline was still there. This is what should have happened with Rasalhague. Rasalhague's baseline should not have been wiped and invalidated on some silly little premise that, you know, Ghost Bear turns out to be all about the family, and so Rasalhague decides to just adopt everything that is Ghost Bear and abandon practically everything that is their original culture, which was the whole entire motivated driving plot of Rasalhague, the preservation of their culture and history, and their hatred of being forced to assimilate and lose their culture. You know, I don't know. You know, it's very easy to say that they were hack writers, like Mage Leader said, but it's really more to it than just that. You know, than just hack writing. So be very careful, writers out there, when you are given the responsibility of continuing someone else's work. You know, just read all the materials, get the baseline, and you can still come up with your own, your own original story for the character. But fans are very attentive, and will catch on, especially if they're aspiring writers and artists. Big thanks to Mage Leader. Thank you very much for letting me react. This was a very good video. I will take a look at others. You've got some very interesting stuff going on in your channel, some interesting videos. So I'll be sure to return later down the line to check out your stuff. Everybody, make sure to go to Mage Leader's channel. Links down in the description below. Comment, like, all that stuff. Here we go. Slap that like there. All right. So head on over to Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com and grab yourself a copy of The Impossible Man, a strange fantasy novel written by me. You'll find links down the book down in the description below, along with links to other merch such as pins, stickers, t-shirts, music. Enjoy the products. Thank you for your patronage. And if you happen to have a copy of The Impossible Man and did a lore video on it, thank you very much. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on it. And if you're interested, you can join me on my live multi-stream on Twitch and Kick every Monday through Thursday, 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where I do lore research, Japanese cultural studies, and gaming, plus more. I look forward to hanging out with you. So until the next round of BattleTech Mech Warrior Research, thank you all for joining me, and I wish you all a good night. Buenas noches, and oyasumi nasai.